first light of Virla 9 fractured sun glanced across the jagged surface of the mining colony, sending shards of iridescent dust spinning through the low gravity. Captain Jace Harlow adjusted the strap of his plasma rifle, the weight feeling heavier than it should have, and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like a curse under his breath. The mission was supposed to be simple: reconnaissance, evaluation of the colony's structural integrity after last week's quakes, and maybe, if he was lucky, avoiding being vaporized by the fusion reactor core still leaking energy down in the lower shafts. But as usual, the universe had other plans. A sharp rumble split the air, and the ground beneath him tilted as if the planet itself had hiccuped. Cracks yawned open along the colony's metal-plated walkways, showering sparks and debris into the half-lit corridors. Jace skidded on the slippery panels, narrowly avoiding a falling container of fused mineral ore. "Well, that's one way to wake up," he muttered, his voice echoing in his helmet. He had barely regained his footing when he caught movement in the chaos, fluid, deliberate, and entirely unnerving. She appeared without warning, stepping through the dust like a whisper of silver wind. Lysera. Her presence was impossible to ignore. At first she looked human, high cheekbones, a lean figure, hair the color of molten silver tumbling over her shoulders. But the long ears, graceful and delicate, twitched in ways that betrayed a mind attuned to every nuance of the battlefield. They flicked toward each sound, each vibration, as though she could hear the faintest heartbeat of metal bending in the storm. Jace blinked, wondering if his own heart was hammering too loudly. She lifted a mangled metal beam with one hand, effortlessly, while guiding a group of miners to safety with the other. Sparks danced across the fractured walkways as though choreographed to her movements. Jace couldn't help but gape. Yeah, I'm sure humans can do that maybe," he said, stepping onto a panel that promptly collapsed under his weight. He flailed, grabbed a railing, and still managed to land on a pile of half-melted machinery, producing a spectacular display of sparks and smoke. Lysera's head tilted slightly, ears flicking in what he could only interpret as either amusement or mild exasperation. "Humans are clumsy," she murmured in that melodic alien tongue, words curling like liquid silver in the air. Jace cleared his throat. "Right, clumsy, totally, that's me." He glanced around, trying to regain some dignity, which was promptly extinguished when a falling crate narrowly missed his helmet and bounced off his shoulder like a rubber ball. Lysera didn't flinch. She simply stepped forward, one hand hovering over the crate, and it floated gently out of his path as if obeying her silent command. "Seriously," Jace muttered, brushing off his armor, "how do you make everything look like a magic trick?" Her eyes, green and piercing, flicked toward him, and for a moment the chaos dimmed. She didn't smile, not exactly, but there was something in the curve of her lips, a subtle twitch that suggested amusement at his fumbling heroics. "Practice," she said, her voice calm but laced with an undertone that suggested she could lift him like a feather if she chose. They moved together through the debris-strewn corridors, Jace falling into step, or more accurately, tripping into step behind her. Magnetic panels shifted beneath their boots, grav anomalies flared unexpectedly, and automated defense drones, perhaps confused by the energy surges, whirred to life, scanning them with piercing red optics. Lysera twirled a hand lazily, and the drones faltered, hesitated, then clattered harmlessly against the walls as if swatted by invisible hands. Jace muttered, "Okay, I am not explaining this to the press." Definitely not. He crouched behind a console, peeking over the edge while Lysera floated effortlessly past him, ears twitching like twin radars. One of the miners gave him a questioning look. He raised a finger, shrugged, and whispered, "Yes, I do this all the time, totally normal." By the time they reached the central shaft, the gravity storm was in full swing, twisting panels and sending sparks dancing like electric fireflies. Lysera's form moved through the chaos with the fluidity of water, catching debris before it could strike, guiding the miners with gestures that seemed both gentle and commanding. Jace tried to mimic her, swinging his hands dramatically, hoping for some telekinetic miracle. Instead, he ended up tangled in cables, spinning in midair before slamming against a reinforced wall. Lysera's ears flicked in amusement, and she didn't even pause. "Humans," she said again, shaking her head. Jace grinned sheepishly. "I like that, it's my new nickname, right?" Finally, they reached the reactor core, a glowing, unstable sphere of condensed energy thrumming with a hum that set the walls vibrating. Lysera's eyes narrowed. "It's worse than I anticipated," she said, stepping forward. The energy reacted to her presence, arcs of light dancing along the walls, but instead of fear, she moved with assurance. Jay stood back, watching as she manipulated the core, threads of energy bending and twisting around her long, elegant ears as though they were part of the machinery itself. He swallowed, muttering, "I guess humans aren't supposed to do that." Lysera glanced at him briefly, one eyebrow raised. "No," she said, "but you can help." Jace's stomach dropped. "Help with that." He looked at his rifle, then at the floating cables, then at her serene, impossible poise. Sure, I'm very helpful," he said, stepping carefully toward a dangling panel, only for it to swing around and almost bonk him on the helmet. Lysera flicked a hand, caught it, and Jace stumbled forward, colliding with her side. "Careful," she said, her tone flat, but the twitch of her lips betrayed her amusement. The miners reached safety, the gravity storm wavered, and Jace, sweaty and singed, realized he was standing next to someone who made everything else look absurdly easy. He had a long way to go, and she was insane in the most awe-inspiring, terrifying, and ridiculously frustrating way. And somehow he was already hooked. As the chaos of sparks, floating debris, and humming machinery swirled around them, Jace muttered to himself, "I hope she doesn't eat me. Or throw me into space. Or both." Lysera's ears twitched, and for the first time he could swear she laughed. The interior of the derelict warship groaned as if waking from a centuries-long slumber, metal plates shifting under the strain of zero-gravity microcurrents and the pull of a nearby black hole. Captain Jace Harlow floated awkwardly, tethered only by the flimsy grip of his boots against a magnetic floor panel, while Lysera moved ahead like a silver specter, long ears trailing behind her and twitching in constant, precise motion. Every corridor seemed alive. Wires snaked along the walls, cables danced with sparks, and holographic displays flickered in and out of existence, occasionally spitting out warnings in alien glyphs that Jace had no hope of understanding. "Fantastic," he muttered. "Just my luck. Haunted spaceship meets sentient electronics meets, oh yeah, the girl who makes me look like a drunk robot." Lysera glanced back, a corner of her mouth twitching upward as if she heard him perfectly well. "You are adaptable," she said, her words smooth but her ears flicking in amusement. Jace raised his hands in mock surrender, wobbling slightly as a floating crate nudged his shoulder. "I prefer the term charmingly unpredictable," he said. Their mission was simple in theory: recover the experimental quantum cores stored deep in the ship's central vault. Simple, that is, until Jace realized that simple in Lysera's vocabulary meant navigate corridors that loop in impossible geometry, avoid automated defense drones armed with plasma cannons, and somehow survive the random gravitational anomalies that threw him spinning every few minutes. "Do you ever get dizzy?" he asked, tumbling backward over a floating cable and landing with a soft thump against a metallic wall. Lysera's ears twitched sharply. "I do not get dizzy, I sense the fluctuations before they occur." She lifted her hand and a small metal crate began floating, spinning gently toward him. "You might try observing rather than flailing," she added, with just the faintest edge of sarcasm. Jace caught the crate clumsily, nearly dropping it, and muttered, "Right, observation, very effective. Observing has never hurt anyone except maybe me." As they moved deeper, the ship seemed to resist their passage. Security drones, previously dormant, activated with a low hum, their red sensors scanning the corridors. Lysera gestured subtly, her hand slicing through the air as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The drones halted mid-motion, hovering like confused insects, then gently clattered against the walls, neutralized without a single shot. Jace gawked. "Okay, that is officially cheating," he said. "I need whatever yoga class or dark sorcery that qualifies as your training." She didn't answer, only continued with an almost casual elegance, her long ears flicking like twin radars picking up the subtlest vibrations in the floor. Jace tried to mimic her gestures, imagining himself moving objects with some telekinetic force, but instead he managed to send a floating tool spinning into a control panel, triggering an obnoxious series of alarms. Lysera exhaled softly, the sound almost musical. "Predictable," she said. Jace saluted mockingly. "Yes, ma'am, predictably human." By the time they reached the main vault corridor, gravity fields were fluctuating violently. He clung to the side of the corridor, gripping handholds as they twisted unpredictably, while Lysera glided beside him, moving as if the laws of physics were merely polite suggestions. Her hands hovered above the vault door, faint arcs of energy trailing from her fingertips as she interfaced with the ship's ancient security systems. Jace, still clinging to a rail, asked, "Mind giving a rookie a hint?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Hints are for beginners," she said. One of her ears flicked and the door slid open silently, revealing the quantum cores glowing softly, pulsating with energy that hummed like a heartbeat. Jace leaned forward, attempting to grab one, only to float backward as a miscalculated movement sent him spinning. Lysera caught him with a flick of her hand, effortlessly stabilizing his momentum, and muttered, perhaps observing first, then moving. He swallowed and nodded. Yes, observing first. Noted. Also note to self, never get cocky. They began to secure the cores, Lysera moving with supernatural grace while Jace attempted to coordinate the floating containers. His clumsiness became comic relief in the tense atmosphere. Every time he tried to stack one core, another slipped, bounced, or floated off toward a vent, leaving him scrambling in zero gravity. Lysera's ears twitched again and a soft laugh escaped her, musical and disbelieving. "Humans," she murmured, "such chaos." Their humor did not last long. The warship shuddered violently as an unstable corridor collapsed behind them, sending sparks and shards of metal hurtling past. Jace shouted, narrowly avoiding a falling panel, and muttered, "Yep, definitely going to need a long vacation after this." Lysera's hand swept through the air, halting the falling debris mid-flight. She twisted slightly, nudging him gently out of harm's way, and Jace clutched her arm. "I appreciate the assist," he said, heart hammering. "Really appreciate it." They finally moved toward the extraction point, quantum cores secured, but the ship's AI having determined that intruders were unwelcome guests. Turrets came online, scanning for heat signatures, while hidden drones emerged from panels like mechanical spiders. Lysera's ears twitched sharply and she muttered a word that resonated with power. The turrets fizzled, drones floated harmlessly, and the security systems seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to continue. Jace stared wide-eyed. "You're insane." "Completely insane, and I mean that in a respectful way." Lysera's gaze flicked toward him. "Insane?" she asked, tone almost teasing. "I am efficient." One of her ears quivered in amusement. Jace rubbed his temple. "Right. Efficient, that's it, totally reasonable." By the time they reached the extraction pod, the black hole's pull was tugging subtly at the ship, creating unpredictable currents of gravity. Lysera floated effortlessly, carrying two of the heavier cores, while Jace stumbled behind, clutching one precariously. A misstep sent him spinning directly toward the open airlock, only for Lysera to catch him with a flick of her hand, ears twitching like delicate antennae. "Careful," she said, "gravity is less forgiving than humans." Jace swallowed, nodding furiously. "Noted, gravity is merciless. Also, you are terrifyingly overqualified for this mission." Lysera's lips curved slightly upward, one hand adjusting a floating core, the other guiding him gently forward. "And you are learning." As the pod disengaged from the ship, gliding away with the cores secured, Jace slumped against the bulkhead, exhausted and disheveled, watching Lysera float effortlessly. He muttered under his breath, "I am never going to keep up with her, ever." A soft sound reached his ears, musical and amused. Lysera's head tilted, ears flicking with that familiar, impossible precision, and for the first time he felt a strange comfort. He may be human, clumsy and chaotic, but somehow next to her he belonged. The asteroid fortress loomed like a jagged crown, orbiting a dying star with the slow inevitability of a predator circling its prey. Captain Jace Harlow floated in the exosuit pod, gripping the magnetic rails as the engines adjusted for microgravity turbulence. Lysera was ahead, moving with her usual eerie elegance, ears extended and quivering as if she were simultaneously listening to the fortress, the vacuum of space, and Jace's internal panic, all at once. He couldn't help muttering, "I swear you can hear thoughts, and judging by that look, you are judging mine." She glanced back over her shoulder, her green eyes sparkling, and Jace thought he saw the faintest smirk play across her lips. "Not thoughts," she said, "patterns. Yours are amusing." Jace nodded. "Great, Glad to be entertaining. Entertaining is my strong suit. He pushed himself forward, boots clanging against the magnetic rails, only to spin wildly when a sudden grav wave knocked him off balance. Lysera caught his arm with one hand, effortlessly holding him in place while she adjusted a floating crate of quantum cores with the other. Humans, she muttered, ears twitching like twin radar dishes. Their mission was simple. Infiltrate the fortress, secure the remaining quantum cores, and escape before the mercenary fleet realized the fortress itself was collapsing under the unstable energy core at its heart. Simple, except that simple had become a relative term since Lysera had entered his life. Simple now involved laser traps that fired unpredictably, sections of floor that twisted in zero-G, and cyborg mercenaries who didn't understand humor or fear. Jace tried to move carefully, emulating her graceful steps, but the floor panel flipped unexpectedly. He fell backward, catching himself on a handhold, arms flailing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Lysera's ears twitched and she made a soft, almost musical sound. "You will adapt," she said, "or you will be comedic collateral." He swallowed, nodding vigorously. "Yes, adapt, not die, got it, comedy optional." He pushed himself forward again, navigating the twisting corridors while dodging the occasional automated laser sweep. Lysera moved ahead as if time itself bent around her. With a flick of her wrist, she lifted debris, disarmed turrets, and nudged floating enemies into walls with precision that made Jace feel both awestruck and utterly incompetent. "Effortless," he muttered, "completely unfair, and very showy." As they approached the core chamber, alarms blared, red lights flashing across the angular interior. The energy core at the fortress's heart pulsed erratically, sending ripples of gravity through the corridors. Lysera raised her hands, fingers dancing through the air as she stabilized the core's field just enough to prevent a catastrophic collapse. Sparks leapt around her, and Jace could only stare in awe, holding onto the wall for dear life. "Do you ever take a day off?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised, ears flicking in amusement. "Does disaster ever take a day off?" she replied. "We must proceed." Jace muttered something about existential threats being unfair, and they moved forward, Lysera carrying two of the heaviest quantum cores while Jace floated awkwardly with the third. Suddenly, a section of floor ripped away under his feet, sending him spinning directly toward the edge of the airlock overlooking the star below. He flailed like a ragdoll, shrieking, "Uh-oh, definitely uh-oh." Lysera's hand shot out, catching him mid-spin and holding him gently. "Humans are fragile," she said, also entertaining. Jace coughed, trying to regain dignity. "Fragile, yes, entertaining, very funny, I appreciate the feedback." He took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. Together, they approached the fortress's central energy chamber, where rogue mercenaries awaited, armed with energy rifles and cybernetic enhancements that glinted in the flickering light. Lysera twirled gracefully, her ears slicing through the air like twin sensors, and within moments, turrets and drones were neutralized, mercenaries knocked off balance by carefully controlled kinetic bursts. Jace, meanwhile, improvised by tripping over a loose cable, accidentally shooting one mercenary into a wall with his tether hook. Lysera didn't even glance at him. "Predictable," she said, and Jace bowed theatrically. "Thank you. Thank you very much." They reached the final core, and Lysera lifted it with ease, humming softly as the energy fields danced around her fingertips. Jace tried to imitate her finesse, holding his core carefully, but one small misstep sent it sliding across the floor. He lunged, catching it just in time and nearly face-planting into Lysera's side. "Careful," she said, ears flicking in annoyance. "Gravity is less forgiving than humans." "I'm adapting," he said, trying to sound confident while wiping sweat from his brow. "Slowly but adapting." The fortress shuddered violently as the unstable core at the center began to collapse, sending shockwaves through the corridors. Lysera's eyes narrowed. "We move, now." She levitated effortlessly, quantum cores secured, ears twitching in constant adjustment to the shifting gravity and incoming debris. Jace followed, relying on his ingenuity more than grace, improvising with tether hooks, magnetic grips, and well-timed pushes off walls. Every mistake was somehow corrected by quick thinking, every stumble made slightly more graceful. By the time they reached the extraction pod, Jace was exhausted, bruised, and singed, but alive, and oddly more confident. As the pod disengaged, drifting away from the collapsing fortress, Jace slumped against the wall. I can't believe we made it, he muttered. Seriously, that was insane, and I mean that literally. Lysera adjusted the quantum cores, her long ears flicking once as she looked at him. You survived, she said. That is impressive. Jace laughed, a breathless, relieved sound. Impressive, yeah, I like the sound of that. I've come a long way from, just floating into space like an idiot. She glanced at him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. You have learned, she said. Adaptation is essential. For the first time, Jace felt a quiet pride. He had struggled, stumbled, and almost been obliterated countless times, but he had grown. The human limitations he had once cursed now felt like tools he could wield creatively, complementing Lysera's insane power. Together, they were unstoppable not because one outmatched the other, but because they had learned to trust, improvise, and laugh even in the face of annihilation. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Jace leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. Next mission, he said, let's try something calm, maybe planetary sightseeing or interstellar chess. Anything that doesn't involve me nearly dying every 5 minutes. Lysera's ears twitched